Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. So obviously, some things have changed in our election from 2020 to 2024. I think that a lot of what allowed the shift to happen and allowed Donald Trump to be elected wasn't necessarily because we changed all the election laws, we got rid of voting machines, etc. I think it was just because the election was too big to rig, that more Americans took it upon themselves to get out and vote and get their friends to vote, etc. And so there was such an overwhelming just energy behind that I think that was and we were able to overcome a lot of the systems that they have used in the past to steal these elections. Now, the concern though is that these same systems are in place. And so while it's, oh, great, 4 years of Donald Trump, well, what happens after that? Because if we just get back in the same cycle again, where our elections are selections and where our leaders are being just chosen and our votes are being changed to make sure that the people that align with the deep state's ideologies are put into power, that's not a good thing. And so joining me today is Trainor, who is the former chair and the current commissioner of the FEC, the Federal Election Commission. Now, he was put into that position under Trump, and actually came in on the Trump administration in the Department of Defense, and then after a few months, he got plucked and put into the Election Commission, which is interesting, and he'll explain that background. But we're going to be diving into just some very real and sober questions of how do we fix this system? How do we kind of fix all the issues that are being allowed that allow illegals to vote with no voter ID, allow the fact that California is still counting ballots to this day from an election that was almost a month ago, right? How do we fix these things? And so Trey spent 20 years, more over 20 years as an attorney in Texas, focusing specifically on election integrity, campaign finance, all the things that I think that are being massively, massively corrupted in our current system. And so I'm just going to ask him some real sober questions of how do we fix this? And I don't want hopefully, he's not going to be getting into what a lot of people, they want to kind of gloss over and say, oh, it's all going to work itself out. Like, no, I want to talk about real solutions. Will there be justice? People that are traitors and that corrupted our elections, will they be put behind bars? Will the FBI get involved? These are questions that I'm genuinely curious about. And as much as I'm mentally moving past the election and focusing on the next 4 years, it's really important that we don't drop the ball and become lose our vigilance as it relates to elections and election security. So that's a big point of this interview, is to remind us and say, hey, like, let's not forget that if we lose focus on this in 4 more years, we'll think, oh yeah, we forgot. Actually, we didn't actually push very hard, and they're still using these voting machines. They're switching ballots, and all of a sudden we're going to have Kamala Harris getting in again, or who knows what. So folks, please enjoy this interview with Trainor. Imagine a future where your wealth is untouchable, a future where every decision you make today creates a foundation of security for tomorrow. Right now, optimism fills the air. A new chapter under Trump is beginning and opportunities seem endless. Markets are climbing, spirits are high. But beneath the surface, whispers of change grow louder. Policies, tariffs, and global shifts are shaping a new economic landscape. The US dollar holds strong, but what happens when the world questions its place, which is already happening? What happens when nations turn away from the familiar and toward the uncertain? Gold is different. For centuries, it has been an anchor in the times of change, a hedge against inflation, a shield against volatility, a sanctuary when the world feels unsteady. Gold doesn't follow the tides. It remains steadfast, unyielding, and enduring. Close your eyes and imagine your wealth secure. Imagine your future unshaken. This is the promise of gold, a tangible investment free from the whims of politics and markets. The time to act is now. While optimism reigns and markets soar, remember that true wisdom comes from preparing for what others cannot see. Gold is not just an investment, it is your anchor, your protection, your legacy. Take the first step towards securing your future. And there's no better company to work with than Noble Gold. Protect your future. Act now. Call 626-654-1906 or visit goldwithseth.com to get your free gold and silver investment guide. Again, that's 626-654-1906 or goldwithseth.com. Mr. Trey Trainor, it's an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great. Thanks, Seth. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. So you are the commissioner of the Federal Election Commission, the FEC, but you came in under Trump, and you initially were in defense, right? So can you give us just a
Sure.
little background of just how you ended up where you are right now, and what it was like, coming in under Trump, and how you're still somehow, you weren't booted out under Biden. So, walk us through a little bit
Sure.
to help us build a background for you.
Sure. So in 2017, when Donald Trump was first elected, I went to work for his administration as a part of the transition effort and as part of the landing team at the Department of Defense. And so I was there from January of 2017 until well, I was there for about 3 months. And then shortly thereafter, President Trump nominated me to the Federal Election Commission for confirmation by the Senate. My confirmation process there was held up by Democrats in the Senate for a long time. There was a lot of back and forth. There was a National Review article about how I was too Catholic to be on the FEC, so they were kind of poking fun at the Senate for holding me up, and that was about the time that Amy Coney Barrett was having her initial confirmation hearing. So anyways, I was nominated to the Federal Election Commission, confirmed by the Senate under President Trump. The Federal Election Commission is made up of 6 commissioners. There are 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. And you serve a 6-year term when you're appointed to that. So I'm now a little over 4.5 years into a 6-year term, coming back into what is now a new Donald Trump administration.
And this is curious. So you're working in the transition team, and you're working within the Department of Defense, but only for a couple of months before Trump plucked you and put you into election and the election commission. What do you think Donald Trump saw in you that made him pluck you out of that role so quickly and put you into the election related role?
Well, so my background as a lawyer, I've practiced campaign finance and election law for over 20 years, and so this really is my background and my area of specialty. My connection to the Department of Defense, really, I had very little connection to the Department of Defense other than I had served in the Army Reserves. I was a member of the Corps of Cadets at Texas A&M, so I kind of grew up in that world, and my early stages of my career had some military experience. My job at the Department of Defense mainly was to work with the White House on looking at other individuals, primarily lawyers, who were going to be coming into the Pentagon and what jobs they could fill. And so really I was it's a glorified term to say that I was a special assistant to the Secretary of Defense. What I really was kind of an HR manager and a eyes and ears for the Trump administration on the ground. However, that's a very important role as we face this transition is for the incoming president to have eyes and ears at each of these agencies because these bureaucrats will run amok without political leadership in place. And outgoing administrations do a very good job of burrowing in kind of low-level political appointees into full-time bureaucrat spots. And so you will see programs that will continue to move forward that the new administration doesn't want to have happen, and yet somehow they're miraculously continue to move forward and come to find out there's a burrowed in former political appointee who's kind of back channeling a lot of some of the same programs. So, it's really important to have these transition elements on the ground.
And so, diving into the election topic, I mean, just to pull up just for almost how comical this is, right? California is still counting ballots. Right? I mean, this is just, it's absolutely ridiculous that
Yeah, absolutely.
and so, and I have so many questions about the election, but I also know that at the federal level, you're not supposed to be dipping your hand in the election pies. I mean, really, it's
Right.
supposed to be done at the state level, and it's how constitutionally it should be set. It's set up, but obviously we have a lot of things that are really bending everything possible about the Constitution, right? Which is really
I
the
agree
deep
with you.
state. I think is a lot of times it's really I look at it as this massive blob of people and organizations that are outside of the Constitution, yet not necessarily breaking the Constitution because they find all these ways around it. Which hopefully, with the Department of Government Efficiency under Vivek and Elon, we see a lot of that cleaned out, obviously under Trump. But looking at the elections specifically, and especially with your background in election law and election integrity, how do we fix this? Because I was, very involved in covering a lot of what happened in 2020. I was one of the people that was covering the Arizona audits, the Maricopa audits, the Cyber Symposium, and I was really focused on looking at that. And I even received, kind of threatening legal letter from one of the big voting machine companies for publicly questioning their integrity. And so looking at from 2020 to 2024, not a lot has changed from my perspective. And in fact, we're now seeing a lot of states that are leveraging the illegals, not showing voter ID, which is crazy. I mean, you need an ID to go,
Right.
get a book from the library. Yet you can, vote in a federal election with nothing. And so, how do you see the path forward changing this? I mean, do you think that under what Trump is doing, and perhaps yourself and what any people he's bringing in, do you think that we could actually bring our elections back to a place where it's single day hand counting, and that's it, paper ballots? I mean, even Elon Musk, who's obviously a big tech guy, says he doesn't even trust blockchain for voting, right? Which
Right.
is blockchain's the
Right.
supposedly the most secure place to store all your assets in Bitcoin and crypto, but he doesn't trust it for voting, and he even recommends paper ballots. So, what do you see as a path forward to that?
Well, Seth, if I could just step back from what you put up just a few minutes ago with regard to California still counting votes. For me, it is unfathomable that we are still counting votes. I tell people this all the time, but if you go look at the history of the presidential election in 1860 when Abraham Lincoln was elected, probably the most controversial presidential election that we've ever had. I mean, it resulted in a civil war based upon the outcome. But Abraham Lincoln, in a time of the fastest mode of communication was via telegraph. When Abraham Lincoln went to bed that night in November in 1860, he knew that he had been elected president of the United States, and so did the country and so did the world know that. In fact, it was so prevalent that he had been elected that folks in South Carolina were already gathering arms and planning to secede. I mean, that's how well established it was that he was elected. And yet, here in 2024, you have California still counting ballots with a much smaller population compared to the nationwide population in 1860 for those congressional districts. And they're using this mail-in ballot system that was created in California is abysmal. It needs to be done away with. And all it does is it is rife with fraud and abuse. And I think you're seeing that play out in these last two congressional seats that are still being counted out there. It's amazing to me that as a lawyer in Texas, we talk about the Johnson election and we talk about Duval County and Box 13, and that's probably the most famous stealing of an election that there ever has been. And I think what you're seeing is the ghost of Box 13 and Duval County has appeared in California with these last minute mail-in ballots that they happen to find that, just happen to have postmarks on them from dates that they can count. And it really is just unheard of that you would have these type of ballots coming in this late in the process, and really holding Congress hostage as to what the majority is going to look like, what decisions that can need to be made. I mean, think about it from the aspect of somebody like Florida, who is now looking at three special elections to fill seats that are going to be vacated January 20th with appointments. The governor there, Governor DeSantis, had to call those special elections, really not knowing what the outcome of the elections in California were and what it might do to upset the balance of power in Congress. And yet he took the step to say, well, the law requires that we set these special elections. We're going to set these special elections. We're going to do it. So, great for him to be able to take that step. And luckily, it looks like the majority there it will stay in the hands of the Republicans without having any negative effects from his decision to set those elections. But at the end of the day, it could have had catastrophic effects and ultimately affected the decision of other states. So, we're getting to the point where it's not just a state level institution that is being affected, but is starting to affect national politics and decisions of other states. But as you said, the federal government has very little role to play here. It would take a constitutional amendment to allow states to be able, or to allow the federal government to come in. I'm not in any way an advocate of that. In fact, I am a very big advocate of what you laid out, where we have one election day where we vote on paper ballots, where they're put into boxes. As a lawyer who practices campaign finance and election law, I love having paper ballots. I like going to courtrooms where I can hold up evidence and show a judge or a jury that here's the ballot, here's how it was marked, here's what the voter said. I can do all of that without talking about who the voter was. I can just look at the physical evidence and say, well, look, they marked it with a pencil. Clearly, they erased it here. They marked in somebody else. They wrote directions on the side of the ballot that said, please don't count my first one. I'm trying to erase it, but my eraser's broken. I mean, these are actual things that I've seen on hand, on written ballots where people have written instructions to the people who are counting. And that is the most secure way to make sure that you follow the voter's intent. And as you mentioned as well, with this, we're importing hundreds of thousands of illegal voters, and there the federal government can do something. And I'm proud to see that the Trump administration is looking to deport criminal aliens as fast as possible and to keep them out of our electoral systems. For me, it's been very disturbing to have places around the country, like New York and other places in their municipal elections, to allow non-citizens to vote. You really are letting the camel's nose under the tent when you have that happen, because you're starting to impart the rights of citizenship on those that aren't citizens and allowing them to affect the outcome of what happens in the country. And, it may sound harmless when you think about some place like, okay, well, New York's a relatively liberal place, and they're probably going to continue to put in place liberal politicians. And it's really not so much the politicians that I'm concerned about. I'm more concerned about with policy decisions, initiative and referendum type things that happen there, because effects in New York City have national effects and international effects on commerce. It's the banking center of the world still, and yet you have non-citizens voting in elections there in a way that may ultimately have some sort of effect on that. So, it really is problematic.
I couldn't agree more. It's a very unique situation I'm seeing emerging where, through my understanding, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, and I took, basic civics in high school and whatnot. I went to art school, so of course I didn't learn much about the government there, right? But as I understand it, the Constitution has really set forth this structure so that a corrupted and tyrannical federal government cannot overtake the states, cannot control at a state level, let alone a county level, things that are against the Constitution. But whereas what we have right now that's unfolding is what I hope to see is a much more constitutionally aligned federal government, which I believe that that's where we're headed with the Trump administration. But what's interesting is that now the corruption is at the state level, right? So if you look at California, where you've got Newsom, and not just California, but a lot of these different governors have come out and said, "Look, we're not going to abide by Trump's immigration policy. We're not going to abide by whatever election rules, etc." And so it's a very unique situation, which, of course, I'm absolutely against granting the federal government more power than it needs just to run the basic fundamentals of protecting our country, etc. But what is the path forward when at the state level there's a deep state at the state level, that really the only thing that I would say that potentially is able to take it out would be something at the federal level, but that would require an extra level of authority and power at the federal level, because this is how I mean this is the only way I think I see moving forward, especially in terms of fixing our elections, let alone a lot of the other things that are happening. So I know that you have a very, very deep understanding of the Constitution and how these things work. So how would that work if there's a corrupted, basically a corrupted governor that doesn't want to follow the executive branch of the government? How do you see that playing out? It's a weird scenario.
Well, I think we're seeing that play out. We're seeing that play out right now on the level of how our immigration laws are enforced. And you've seen a commitment from this incoming administration to send in federal officials to enforce what is federal law in those places, and to say, well, if the state's not going to do it, we're going to use our federal powers that we do have. I'll tell you, one of the things that a lot of people have not talked much about, and one of the things that I hope that this incoming administration will address, are things like the level of federal power that is given to states like California on the basis of census counts. And you may recall that under the Obama administration, they eliminated a question about citizenship on the census, and so you have census counts in this country that show large numbers of people, and we do allocations of congressional seats based upon that census count. And we have allocations of people that are not citizens of this country that are being counted in that census, and they may or may not be here permanently. They may be here temporarily, but we don't have any idea who these people are. I mean, and this really gets to that immigration element of not knowing who it is. But I'm hoping that this new incoming Department of Commerce leadership and the Census Bureau will ultimately decide to put a census citizenship question back out there. And ultimately, look, if these numbers are far askew, they need to be readjusted immediately to recognize, under regular constitutional principles of one person, one vote, that we have a Congress that's out of whack. We have an oversized delegation from California or New York or these liberal states that have oversized representation of illegal aliens that are there. And so ultimately, I think that's one way that it can be addressed. The other way that it can be done is the Constitution does allow for Congress to have some oversight of the time, enter, place type regulate. I mean, not that, but they do allow for some oversight as to what's going on of the elections. And I think the biggest tool that they have is the ability to call in and say, we need these numbers decided sooner. So in the case of California, they can say, look, we're all, because Congress ultimately is the decision maker as to what their membership is. And they can call and put forth to places like California and places that are using these mail-in ballot systems that are being manipulated, and say, we need these numbers sooner. We need these numbers within 3 days, 5 days, 10 days, whatever it is. Put a number on it, pick a number, and say, we need these numbers then in order to be able to make a decision about what our membership is. And clearly the Constitution gives them the authority to decide their membership. And so they can say, this is the amount of time that we need in order to be able to do it. So all of that takes some real deep legal thinking as to how and it would be implemented, and what the verbiage would look like, and the rules surrounding it. But I think there are tools in the toolbox to assert some constitutional authority that they already have without amending the Constitution, to allow them to get answers sooner, quicker. And I think the ultimate way for this incoming administration is just to say, look, if y'all aren't going to follow the law, we're going to send in federal officials who are going to follow the law. That can be done on the election front. Currently the National Voter Registration Act it requires states to clean up their voting rolls. If they're not going to clean up their voting rolls, you can, there's certain ways to withhold money. That a lot of the money that's used to pay for these voting machines that we all so despise around the country comes from grants through the Elections Assistance Commission, through various federal programs. And so withhold that money. So we're not going to do that. If you're using systems that we think are easily manipulated, systems that, my home state of Texas has banned some of these systems and doesn't allow them to be used because they're easily manipulated, so have the federal government come in and say, we're not going to fund the purchase of those types of equipment, even though the state may think that that's what, if the state wants to do it with state money, great, do it with state money. But, I think they still hold the power of the purse to be able to control some of these things.
So that makes sense, that basically that a lot of what's happening at the state level is still because it's being funded and allowed at the federal level. And so cutting off that
Absolutely.
funding, cutting off the allowance, basically. It's like if you have a 15-year-old kid that buys nothing but, candy at the grocery store down the street, we'll just stop giving him money and he'll stop buying candy,
Right.
right? And
Right.
so that makes sense. It's just crazy that you mentioned the census and how they removed the question of, are you a citizen? I mean, it's like, it seems so wild. Like, sometimes I think that when I sit back and, especially if I'm reading historical books, whether it's, the Federalist Papers or, different things about the founding fathers, or even going back into, say, Aristotle or Plato. And I think, what would they think if they saw our society now, right? Where you've literally got people like, at the Supreme Court level that won't answer the question of, is there a difference between a man and a woman, right? Or do you know what a woman is? I mean, these are just bonkers things. Or even, the founding fathers, if they looked forward and they saw in their crystal ball, like, wait, they stopped asking people whether they were citizens of the country. I mean, it
Right.
seems so crazy, but these things have all become normalized. But so one question that I would love to hear your thoughts on, and especially with, Kash Patel, now going to be heading up the FBI, he's someone I've interviewed before, I've met. I think he's a very solid, very America first, very constitutional, in his approach and his belief system. Do you think that we can start to see some justice being dealt for all this criminality? As I know that also Trump put out a very, I wouldn't even say cryptic, but he put out a very strong tweet, that was basically cease and desist. It was, from my perspective of reading it, it looked like it was a legal statement saying, preserve, basically preserve records. Anybody that, like, we're watching you like a hawk. Anybody that's caught interfering with the elections, this is before he was going to win. He said, "I will win, and I will come after you, and I'll be issuing basically the longest prison sentences that we've issued." I mean, he really kind of made a pretty strong threat. So, do you believe that, that moving forward, his administration gets in, that not only can we hopefully clean up some of the elections, bring back same day voting, paper ballots, etc., but also, do you think that there's a chance that we could see, like, real prosecution and justice being delivered to people that I look at as traitors, right? To me, someone that undermines our elections in this country is a traitor, that they're betraying the Constitution. They're betraying everything that this country stands for, as a country run by we the people. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, not only are they betraying the Constitution, they're actually harming an American citizen. Now, it's not a physical harm, but what they are doing is they are taking away a legitimate vote of a citizen of this country. So for every illegal vote, it is hurting at least one, if not hundreds, of legitimate voters in the process. And it's taking away from our republic, in that it is undermining the republic, the values of the republic. It is undermining the processes of the republic by allowing just one illegal vote to be counted in any election. And I firmly believe that is problematic. Now, will there be justice? Absolutely. I think that the incoming administration is going to go after these type of crimes, but it's the great thing is it's not going to be in a uh, politicized way. It's going to be a very strict interpretation of what the law is, and those people that have violated are going to be held to account for the violations that they have. They're not going to go after political opponents, and more importantly, they're not going to make the process the punishment. And I think that there are so many people in the incoming administration who have been part of a a system of justice where the process was the punishment. They really ultimately didn't care if they served jail time or anything else. So there's that to be said. With regard to with regard to the the criminality associated with it, I think we need to look back at 2017 and what happened there. In 2017, when Donald Trump came into office, he put in place a blue ribbon panel to look into elections and to make some reforms, particularly with our voter registration efforts and voter ID and those type of things. I don't think that he will make that type of appointment to put in place a blue ribbon panel this time, because that became the subject of all sorts of media and investigation and those type of things. I think the way that this happens going forward is that the apparatuses of government that currently exist and have regulation over various aspects of the election will be able to go in and have a free hand to look at it. So, for example, in my job at the Federal Election Commission dealing with campaign finance issues, my hope is that there is a hue and cry for allowing individual citizens to engage in more speech without having to register with the government and let them know, hey, I'm spending $50 to buy posters to give to my neighbors. I mean, those type of things are just asinine. They infringe upon the First Amendment. And at the end of the day,
Look, I'm going to be realistic about my diet in December. It's got to be the worst month of the year in terms of eating right. I'm inevitably going to find myself stuffing treats, meats, and dishes into my mouth, leaving very little room for the right stuff. But I will take Balance of Nature every single day. Balance of Nature is made from whole fruit and veggie ingredients, and I will not skip taking those daily supplements. It's the one thing that I will get right because feeling good is important to me, especially in December. So, folks, join me in pushing back against the dreaded December diet crash. Get Balance of Nature today. Use my discount code SETH, that's SETH, and sign up as a new customer to get 50% off plus free shipping and their money back guarantee. So, folks, this is an awesome December discount, but you must use my promo code SETH. So call them at 800-2468-751 and use discount code SETH, or order online at balanceofnature.com. Use discount code SETH to get 50% off plus free shipping.
Are things that need to be closely looked at by an agency like mine. You look at the Elections Assistance Commission, they currently give guidance to states on kind of best practices. I think under the Trump administration, you'll see them, be more rigorous in what it is that they're doing, and more importantly, checking on the work that's being done. You mentioned the FBI. I think the Public Integrity Unit will be very active in going after individuals that are in fact infringing upon the public integrity by creating these type of fraud and abuse situations that you see. And a lot of those fraud and abuse situations are going to come from government officials who are on the extreme end, they're stuffing ballot boxes. On the less extreme end, they're just not doing their job. They're just not checking for citizenship when they're supposed to. They're not keeping their voting rolls clean. They're not maintaining equipment the way that they need to be. They're not running the logic and accuracy tests that need to be run on this equipment before it's put out. I mean, all of those type of things I think are susceptible to some criminal aspects, if and when you get the right people into positions in the federal government.
And so, looking at again, the bloat of the federal government, and specifically the, kind of the cascading massive concentration of the federal employees around the DC area. I know Trump has talked about taking these various agencies and moving them out into the country. Why not? Why isn't USDA sitting in the middle of, say, the breadbasket of America? Say it's in the Midwest somewhere. Why isn't the FBI out in, say, Texas or wherever? Right? It makes a lot of sense, especially if you look at if my numbers serve me correctly. I think 96% of the District of Columbia voted for Harris over Trump, or somewhere near that. It was like only a few points less than 100% of people living in the DC area actually voted for Trump, whereas the vast, vast, vast majority, you can see, they're voting to keep their jobs for one reason, right? Which it's kind of funny watching Elon and Vivek come in here. Like, look at when Elon took over Twitter, and I think he acts like 85% of the staff. So I would say that for people that are living and working in DC, they're probably chomping their nails right now looking at, okay, so what are my other backup options for a job? Because coming into the office one day a month isn't going to cut it anymore. And so I know that you recently penned an op-ed for the Daily Caller about, how it's time to move the FEC out of Washington. So I guess one question I have is, how large is the FEC? How many employees are there? And what is I'd like to have you just explain some of your talking points of what you think would be behind moving the FEC out of Washington.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for drawing attention to it. I think it's a topic that's very important and very timely with the incoming administration for us to talk about moving agencies out of Washington, D.C. And look, I love Washington, D.C. as much as anybody. We have great history there. We have great museums there. a lot of artifacts. Congress absolutely has to be situated there. The White House is situated there. A lot of important things that take place there. And there are legitimate reasons to have consolidated, national defense decisions and intelligence community and those type of things in close proximity to the civilian leadership of the government. So, I'm not in any way advocating for that. But as you mentioned, the USDA, my agency, the Federal Election Commission. Now, the Federal Election Commission is a little over 300 employees. So we're not talking about a big federal agency, but for every person that we pay at the FEC in their paycheck, they get their salary, plus they get an additional over 33% more added to their salary for location pay because of the high cost of living associated with Washington, D.C. and the Maryland, Virginia area. And so for every taxpayer now is paying an additional third on every salary to every employee that works in and around the Washington, D.C. area. So if you were to move these agencies out, the immediate effect is that for every employee, you are cutting 33% out of that individual's salary every month, every single month. That is a huge cost savings for moving these agencies out. There are places around the country that are suffering and need tenants in buildings. The GSA could very easily do contracts, and you could move federal agencies into some amazing facilities around the country. Detroit is a shambles. There's plenty of business property to be had in Detroit. Same thing in Chicago. There's plenty of places to be had there. All of these places are places that you could very quickly move federal agencies out of, and you could save the taxpayers a ton in doing it. It's very high rent in Washington, D.C. And more importantly than that, we've taken government and centered it all in Washington, D.C., and we've taken it away from the people. Those bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. have no idea what goes on in everyday America because they don't live in everyday America. They hang out with other bureaucrats. They go to restaurants with other bureaucrats. That's it. That's all they know. They know the insular world of inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. So in my op-ed, I said, look, move the Federal Election Commission to Odessa, Texas. Average, everyday, hardworking Americans in the oil patch, let them be out there, let them converse with them, and let them talk about what real politics is like and how it affects the American people on a daily basis. And I know people kind of chuckle and said, "Oh, Odessa, Texas, out in West Texas," but look, it's the home of the University of Texas of the Permian Basin, so there's a major higher education institution there. The John Ben Shepherd Leadership Institute. He's a former Secretary of State and Attorney General for the state of Texas. He's got an institute out there. They bring in world-renowned speakers all of the time. So it's not like we're sending them out, to some backwater. I mean, these are still legitimate places where things go on. And as long as you have high-speed internet and the ability to, put together databases and things like that, and Texas is a great place to do that. I mean, Texas is booming with regard to the ability to be able to handle the gig economy, and Elon Musk is moving all of his operations here, so it couldn't be that bad. And so at the end of the day, I think it's an ideal place. And more importantly, you get rid of that extra 33% that you have to pay. And eventually, I think that the workers in Washington, D.C. are going to like it. They're going to have great work-life balance. They're going to be able to say, hey, I can take off and go visit some other parts of the country. I can get out. I've eliminated hours worth of commute time because there's not the same type of traffic situation that you have. The amount of savings on not having to do road construction projects inside the Beltway in DC would be enormous. So all of these things are immediate benefits that are available from moving these agencies out. There are tons of small agencies like the FEC, 300 or 400 employees. You pick them up, you move them. America will never know any different. with regard to where the organization is housed. It's a matter of changing some addresses on some letterhead and people sending in reports to a different place. But America will be no worse the wear for having agencies spread out all across, and there's not some sort of big confab that needs to happen of all of the bureaucrats. In fact, what we need to do is eliminate all of the big confabs of the bureaucrats, and return more power to the people.
Gosh, and you make a really good point that I hadn't thought about in terms of just revitalizing areas of the country that have just destroyed economies. I grew up in in central and southern Ohio, where you go drive. I go drive to say Nelsonville, the little factory town that my mom grew up in, and it's just
Mhm.
it's gutted, right? Because all those jobs went to China. There's
Right.
now fentanyl addicts dying on the streets. I mean, it's so sad. You mentioned Detroit, which is a prime example. So, like, I'd love to see a strategic that be, one of the criteria for where they're moving these agencies is where does our country need to be revitalized? Like, say, take, the FBI, for instance, go pluck, set them into Detroit, right? And see what that does to the economy there to bring in, thousands and thousands of jobs. Like that's a great idea. But I also you make a good point though, and it's the idea that DC is a bubble, right? And that the bureaucrats they're disconnected from people. They're disconnected from the land. Like I grew up in rural Ohio. I then moved to New York City of all places and lived in the heart of Manhattan for a decade or so. So I hate cities. I hate traffic. And now we're
Right.
back out in the country. We've got 7 acres, and we've got chickens, and we're getting goats, and we're homesteading, and we're getting bees in the spring. And I just feel like that you take someone and put them in an environment where they can spend part of their life just interacting with nature, and I think something divine happens to them. Like, something really special happens when you pull someone out of that energy of these big cities and you place them back on the land. So I would love to see that. I think that it would represent a massive shift.
Well, and that perfectly aligns, frankly, with the vision that the founders had for the country. We talked earlier about the founders. What would they think? I think one of the things that they would find abominable is that all government is concentrated in Washington, D.C. When it was originally constructed and seated to be the District of Columbia, I don't think that there was any thought that all of government would be housed there. In fact, they were big proponents of having individuals out in the states interacting with the people, recognizing that government that is closer to the people is much better government. And so I agree with you. I also agree with you with people getting out and engaging with the land is important. And look, we all benefit from that. We have cost savings benefits with that. We have emotional health well-being benefits with that, which in turn has its own savings associated with it. It also makes it where people can interact with government better. If you have local offices that you can go to where there's the ability to actually touch your government, then you as a citizen become more engaged in what's going on and paying attention. I mean, if you move the FEC to Odessa, all of a sudden there's going to be a lot of people in Odessa who currently don't really care much about what's going on campaign finance wise, but it's going to be in the local news. It's going to be covered. I mean, it's something that they're going to talk about, and you have a much better educated electorate because of it, because people are out there talking about it. Right now, it's hidden away, in a building in Washington D.C. that nobody talks about.
Exactly, and I think that's how they like it, right? Because it's, darkness is where I think bad things hide, and how do you get rid of evil? You pull it into the light. So,
Right,
I'd
absolutely.
love to see that. So, as we're wrapping up, I wanna pull up your Twitter page here, encourage folks to follow you there. It's at TX Election Law, and, Trey, I just wanna see as we're wrapping up, do you have any final thoughts or any kinda hopes or, aspirations for the future?
Uh, Well, Seth, first of all, I just want to thank you for having me on. It's been a great conversation. I've enjoyed talking about it, and I'm glad that people are still talking about these issues surrounding election integrity. I think it's very, very important that we keep the focus there. I tell people all the time the reason that we had fewer problems, and there still were problems, but the reason we had fewer problems in the 2024 election compared to the 2020 election is because Donald Trump made such a big deal out of the problems that we had in 2020. I think a lot of those problems are still inherent in the system. And look, elections are run by humans and humans are flawed. And so there's always going to be something you can point to. But I think there are also things that can be done to eliminate that. And the way that the elimination comes is for individuals to keep talking about it and keep pressing forward to make the republic better. I hope that we see that from this incoming administration. I know that they have a focus on it. And are going to do what they can. I think they're going to be much smarter and wiser about how they do it. So I think we'll see gradual changes, but I think they're going to continue to be the focus. And so really, it's just been my pleasure to be with you, and I have great hope for the future of America right now.
I do too. I really do. Well, Trey, thank you. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Take care and God bless.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Do you keep hearing more cases of your friends and family getting a life-threatening diagnosis of cancer? Or perhaps it's even happened to you? Well, the unfortunate reality is that turbo cancer is now a worldwide epidemic. But the question we should all be asking is, what can I do about it? Well, the good news is that there are therapies that are working and proven in thousands of clinical studies. So, one study on PubMed found that breast cancer's growth rate dropped by 40% in only 24 hours after using red light therapy. Another study on prostate cancer found that 49% of the over 400 male participants went into remission with just one red light therapy session. A lymphoma cancer pilot study showed that 3 out of 3 of the patients became cancer-free. It sounds unbelievable, but it's true. And you can discover all this information and more in a special training program from investigative medical journalist Jonathan Otto, who will show you how you can use red light, including the specific wavelengths as proven by studies, for all different types of cancer, as well as tinnitus, weight loss, wrinkles, acne, dementia, cognitive function, depression, anxiety, long COVID, jab injuries, stem cell regeneration, lower back pain, sciatica, the whole array of autoimmune diseases, including thyroid disease, arthritis, lupus, and gut disorders, and so much more. In fact, you can get your own in-home red light therapy device risk-free, as you're completely covered by a 60-day money-back guarantee and a 3-year warranty. On top of that, we've got financing options so you can get it now and pay later. And the best thing, folks, is that this technology has become amazingly affordable. It's way less than you'd expect, with the smaller units costing only a couple $100. So just go to myredlight.com to make sure you don't miss out this free special training program and claim the extremely limited time bonus gifts and discounts, which include an additional 10% off with the coupon code SETH. Again, go to myredlight.com to get access to the free training. And if you make a purchase, make sure you use a promo code SETH, that's SETH, to get an additional 10% off the already heavily discounted red light therapy products. Look, I'm going to be realistic about my diet in December. It's got to be the worst month of the year in terms of eating right. I'm inevitably going to find myself stuffing treats, meats, and dishes into my mouth, leaving very little room for the right stuff. But I will take Balance of Nature every single day. Balance of Nature is made from whole fruit and veggie ingredients, and I will not skip taking those daily supplements. It's the one thing that I will get right because feeling good is important to me, especially in December. So, folks, join me in pushing back against the dreaded December diet crash. Get Balance of Nature today. Use my discount code SETH, that's SETH, and sign up as a new customer to get 50% off plus free shipping and their money back guarantee. So, folks, this is an awesome December discount, but you must use my promo code SETH. So call them at 800-246-8751 and use discount code SETH. Or order online at balanceofnature.com. Use discount code SETH to get 50% off plus free shipping.